Shut up! Could you just die? Could you actually just die? Could you cease to exist? Could you let me take away your breathing? Your life force needs to no longer be within any of the 9 realms. 8 realms, because one of them is gone. I'm tired of you dying. I need you dying now. I try to do a play on once.
So wagwan y'all, me there. Me have to say, aya goody, aya goody, aya goody. Okay, so the time has finally come for me to give my personal review on God of War Ragnarok. Let it be known that this will be heavily focused on give me God of War difficulty, the hardest difficulty on the game, because that's what I played it, completed it, and 100% of the game on with my first walkthrough. Side note, I may do challenges on this game at a later date, but we'll see about all that now, won't we, darling? Anyway, I'm gonna break this video up into 5 points: pros, cons, tips, mentions, conclusion. So starting with the pros, the first, second, third, fourth, they all kind of link with each other, but I'm gonna give them their own separate segment and speak about them for a little bit, right? So the first one I'm gonna start with is the voice acting. I think they did an absolutely amazing job with the actors they casted to play these characters and to portray them the way they did. With my favorite being Odin, who's voiced by Richard Schiff. Right, I presume that's how you say his last name. If it isn't, we're gonna go about our day. But his witty, sarcastic manner had me dying every time he was speaking. I enjoyed every line he delivered, no matter what context it was in, because that's how great the voice acting was. But voice acting can only be as great as the second point, which is the dialects, right? A character can only sound and be as great and can be feeling as great if they're written as well. And I feel like each character communicated in the best way for them and the best way that showed off their character. And like I said, I feel like each voice actor did an amazing job making sure that that was crossed over and it was felt and followed throughout, right? My next point is going to be about the storyline. I wouldn't say they did anything groundbreaking, but guess what? Spoiler alert! The one thing I will say they did, right, which was a bit crazy, was Tyr being Odin. Now, for me, if it wasn't spoiled, that moment I feel like would have been so crazy for me. Oh my god. But because I knew it was coming, I kind of knew before it happened that it was going to happen. Like, in that moment, I was like, yeah, son, this is when he makes the move. But I feel like, yeah, they didn't necessarily do anything groundbreaking, but I feel like they followed up from where 2018 left off well, and I feel like they continue to go forward well. I feel like they did a great job introducing aspects from the past, building on the present, and giving both an idea and leaving it to a mystery of what the future may be. With the storyline being actually my favorite part of the game, especially on the difficulty, or specifically because of the difficulty that I played on. It was his saving grace. It was the saving grace. Wow, it was saving grace. Saving grace. Never mind. On a similar vibe of all that, the next point I'm going to mention is about character development. They made me so proud with the way they did things, especially and most specifically talking about the way they changed up and developed Kratos. I, for one, I'm fully here for it. I enjoy the fact that even though it took until the end, he was able to let go of his anger and stop looking at it with so much hatred. He was able to have tender, touching moments with Atreus, especially when they hugged. For me, given that we know Kratos' backstory, that was such a great and touching moment. Like, I really enjoyed that they did that. I enjoyed them showing him trying to become a better friend and a better parent, teacher, ally to all those around him as well. And I feel like it was kind of shown when he becomes the general and he starts trying to have to maintain these people. I feel like he works well in that. Atreus is a character I don't have much to really say about, realistically. The only thing I hope for Atreus is that he bags Angerboda. I hope them two become a couple. I'm shipping them hard. But other than that, Atreus was just Atreus. Like, he had moments and aspects of him being low-key, but it wasn't in the necessary of the mischief was mischieving. It was more so like, it was an aspect of him trying to deceive both sides whilst getting information for both sides, from both sides, and then for one specific side. I feel like that was the mischievous part of him being low-key in a sense, which is ironic because he was trying to stay low-key, being low-key. Never mind that. But I feel like other than that, not really much more to talk about the guy. I don't feel like there's really much more to talk about the guy. A character that got a story which I wasn't expecting, which I enjoyed, was Mimir, right? when you go through the land of the dwarves, Svartalheim, however you say it, we're going with the land of the dwarves. And you get to get side quests, which get to show his personality before he was just a head and he was still serving Odin. When you get the side quests about Sigrun's past, his wife, that was also an interesting feature. And then obviously defeating and finding the berserkers, again, backstory on him through that as well. I thought they were all interesting touches to give to this character that up until this point has basically just been used as a dictionary and encyclopedia, just a whole library up until this point, right? Touching up on that, what the hell? Touching up on that, I will also mention I love the fact that him and Sigrun managed to get a one-to-one closure conversation before Ragnarok started. I personally enjoyed that as well. Like I said, giving you the side quest and understanding what you now know about him and seeing her past, it was a nice touch-up. You've got the story between Brock and Sindri. Brock dying whenever he died and Sindri reviving him and not managing to get all his soul pieces again. So then once Brock died again, he actually couldn't be revived because he wasn't realistically a full person, hand air quotations, or full dwarf. I feel like that was an interesting story, seeing Sindri actually lose his whole composure and being such a calm and collective person to now filled with spite, rage, bitterness, and fully holding it down, right? There's even scenes after you complete Ragnarok where you get the funeral, and even then Sindri comes for it and then he also just vanishes again. He's still held with all the anger and the emotions and the blame towards us. It's interesting, right? And I like the fact that then Lunda then takes over, doing over the shop. It's a nice touch up. The rest of the characters don't necessarily have much unnecessarily want to talk about. You've got Freya putting the differences aside with Kratos to be Odin. You got friends and brothers forming unions to be able to be Odin. And then you have the backstory, or not necessarily backstory, but you get to see inside the Aesir gods and the dysfunctionality between them, which is also nice because you get to see all the gods are dysfunctional, dealing with their own personal family problems, but trying to also move forward, which is nice. It creates the human nature, which is ironic given we're talking about gods in this sense, right? But it makes them feel human, humanizes them, makes them feel normal, creates relatability. You see actual problems that we go through on our day to day. So it's nice to see that, you know what I mean? That's all of that, right? Minus the graphics being amazing, concludes everything I have to say that I enjoyed about the game. Now when you realize it's all storyline driven, you're gonna realize that combat is where my problem's at, boss. But I guess that also makes sense given the difficulty I played it at. But anyway, neither here nor there. Stop living in despair. No. Jam, man. Anyway, we're gonna move on. Before we do move on, I will say my darling Angerboda, Odin, and Heimdall, top 3 characters. Like Angerboda, it's just bias, I'm gonna be honest with you. Odin's voice acting is amazing. And Heimdall, you love to hate him and you hate to love him. He's just so smug. He is a bag of products used to clean. If you get what I'm trying to say, because I'm trying to keep it PG here, then you know where I'm at with that, right? He is that. Begins with a D. Anyway, we're gonna move on to the cons. So let me rip into the combat of this game. Number 1, you are overwhelmed with the number of enemies you have to fight at any given time. Oh my, this was my biggest gripe throughout the entirety of the game. The entirety. Wow. We're gonna move on, but the whole game, you get what I'm trying to say, throughout the whole game, that was my biggest gripe, right? Especially when it came to learning new enemies, right? So here's what's the problem. You get used to fighting certain enemy types, right? They introduce a new enemy type. Now, amongst this, you've got at least 3 to maybe possibly 10 other enemies you have to worry about. So in that situation of trying to understand how this new enemy fights, you're left with 2 choices. Do you try and defeat all the enemies you understand and hope that the enemy you don't understand doesn't blindside you and kill you, and hit you with something unexpected? Or do you try and solo the new enemy, but then you're gonna get blindsided and forget about the enemies you previously understood? And guess what? The lizard that was on the wall, yeah, spat some poison, blew out your back, now you're dead. It's crazy. It's not an enjoyable fighting experience, and it's not an enjoyable learning curve, because you're not challenged on having to fight difficult enemies. You're challenged on multitasking multiple things at once, right? The game does say your reflexes will be challenged before you start the game, but it's not reflexes in the sense of hand-eye coordination. It's reflexes in the sense of, like I just said, you're having to juggle multiple things at one given time, and it's overwhelming. It is not an enjoyable learning curve at all. Like, it's tedious and annoying to the point where After the first week or two, I was genuinely quite likely going to quit playing this game. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had a break for 1 week, I would have burnt myself out and I would have quit the game because of this. Also, didn't necessarily enjoy the editing process, but tie them both together, there was not many redeeming aspects in that time period. So I was ready to up and leave. Because my frustration was beyond high, made me want to break everything. On the topic of breaking things, the hateful, how ironically named. Whoever named them, shout out you, because you knew what you were doing. I hate them passionately. Let me add in with a burning passion. Now, that makes sense because they all have fire attacks, right? They're the most tedious things to have to fight. I will say, parrying the hateful though is the most satisfying thing throughout the game. I won't lie, because of how many attacks they do is very satisfying. But I hated them. The next big thing I'll mention is the berserkers. That's the next main mini boss type I'm going to now talk about, right? Out of the 11 to 12 fights you have, I only enjoyed 3 to 5 of them, right? They were extremely annoying and tedious, and let it be known that both the hateful, the berserkers, and any other mini boss type can also spawn in more enemies, thus meaning you're even overwhelmed during boss fights. Do you know how annoying and tedious that is? You know how ridiculous that is to be overwhelmed with a boss present who can realistically at that difficulty 1 to maybe 3 hit you. It is absolutely ludicrous. I don't understand what their thought process was when they did such a thing. The benefit about at least with the hateful and the berserkers is once you clear at least half of them, you understand how they fire and you're able to adapt your playstyle to the variation of which other one they are. But it is still annoying to have to deal with. And there's 2 berserkers I want to talk about specifically which gave me the most grief. So you've got one in that Vanaheim mid-map. This guy, don't remember his name, he will spawn in 2 walkers, 2 nightmares, right? If you kill the enemies, he will spawn in more. And if you don't kill the enemies, he will spawn in more over time. So realistically, your best bet is to hope you just manage to kill them all and then kill him before this happens, right? It is the most annoying and tedious thing. I remember spending several hours on it, racking my brain on it. I was genuinely annoyed. But in situations like that, just leave, come back at a later date. My second mention for bosses will be the one that is within the top right corner of Alpha. Now this one is also extremely tedious because I'm gonna break it down to you. So there's 3 enemies. You have the main boss, the main berserker, and you have 2 mini berserkers. I'm gonna call him main boss, main dude. Everyone's gonna be called minis, right? So the problems with this, the minis cannot be staggered or stunned, which is annoying, and they also, like I said, they are berserker boss types, so they have berserker movesets as well. When the main dude's still alive, it's doable given that their aggression levels are dropped down to obviously make the fight somewhat fair and or bearable, except they have this one single attack which is ridiculous. So they're both elemental types, one fire, one water, right? Or ice. They have one specific move where they will create an orb and they will throw it towards you, and this ball can only be destroyed if you use one of your weapons as a projectile to destroy it. If not, it's going to follow you around and it's going to hit you. You're going to take damage. If you're lucky, it may hit the ground if you're able to outmaneuver it, but the likeliness is you're going to get hit unless you manage to destroy it. But here's the problem with that attack, right? In this game, they introduce blue shield attacks, which I'll talk about at a later date. But because of said mechanism, you usually have to stay quite close to bosses because of the way it works. So in the event that they throw in this orb, you're going to be too close to a boss and them, because they're usually joined together as well. So the problem is, you'll be too close to the boss that when they throw the orb, you won't be able to destroy the orb in time, which also is a problem for the fact that when they shoot the orb, the main boss also increases his aggro. He usually throws 2 punches straight off the bat, and if you're all within close proximity of each other, you're going to get hit either by the punches, by the orb, or you're going to get hit by or both. You can't actually do anything about it. You can't block the orb neither, so it's annoying. And even if you destroy it, you're going to get hit, and even if you block, you get hit. I feel like the vast majority of the other berserkers were forgettable, which is unfortunate because some of them are enjoyable, like I said, especially the one-on-ones where you actually have time to focus on the move style and the fight pattern and get to take them for what they really are. Those ones are great. The one berserker I will mention which was enjoyable was the King Berserker. Now, he doesn't offer any new variants of what you haven't seen from the berserkers previously, but he does a great job mixing in all of the different fire patterns that they all possess and or hold. So having to stay on your toes and read which weapon he has in hand to know which way you need to play, block, parry, so on and so forth. It was interesting. It was a fun fight because of that, right? The one pro, which I'm gonna throw in the cons, which shouldn't be here, is the guy in the boss fight, right? The Queen Valkyrie at the end of the game. That boss fight to me is the best fight in the entire game. It was done and executed so well. The learning curve is exactly where I wanted it to be, and the fight as a whole is absolutely amazing. The relief I felt after beating her and having already spent probably the most time on the boss, it made me feel like I was in 2018, and that was amazing to me, right? I wish the Odin boss fight felt the way that did. Granted, the Odin boss fight was good, but you could definitely feel it was way more based on the storyline rather than being a difficult boss. It was way more for fun, playability, and enjoyment, which I don't dislike. I'm just saying I wish it had that element that made me feel relief when I beat him, because I only did it on my first attempt and it didn't feel like much, you know what I mean? Also, I feel like they wasted potential on the Thor fights and the other Aesir gods. I feel like there could have been more. But specifically going back to Thor, I feel like they could have maybe done something like they did with Boulder. But I feel like given that you fight Boulder so many times is why they didn't. But it just felt lackluster. Like when you finally fight him at the end, it wasn't any... When you finally fight him at the end, it was an enjoyable fight, and he does add in more attacks, but it doesn't feel nowhere near as it did the first time you fight him, right? But you feel like you're really in danger or really in jeopardy. It's still a good fight, but I feel like they could have done more. Okay, so now we're moving on to tips. No PG, but let me spill tea and how you can be a step ahead. Now, if you're not from the UK, the likeliness is that reference over your head, right? And guess what? I'm not explaining it either. Go into the comments and find out. Yeah, overseas drip. No, I'm joking. So my number one tip, right, is going to go down to the Valor ability. I'm going to give this so much props. It is the best thing and something you need to implement in your gaming for this game, right? Especially if you play aggressively, especially if you enjoy parrying and being up in enemies and bosses fights. It is the most perfect thing to use. So let me explain it instead of gassing it up and then giving it that, you know what I'm saying? We're keeping it PG, but if you know what that meant, you know what that meant. So it's amazing because if you use it as a parry or you time it as a parry, you will only benefit from it. So let me make that make sense. If you are going to take damage from an attack that you can't block and or dodge, if you use the Valor as a parry, you will negate the damage you would have just took, and you would also gain health. And I do this multiple times, especially near the end of the game. It saves me so many different times. It is amazing. And once you get that timing down for it, you can actually tactically take damage and not actually take damage and gain health because of the ability. An example of when this is useful is when you're fighting the Berserkers, right? They have one specific attack where they run up in front of you, they move their hands, and they throw out a cloud of poison, right? If you mistime the parry for that, they're always going to punish you straight after with a two-piece combo, right? But because your shields and postures broke, you can't dodge. So if you use the Valor, you tank the two punches, both punches, right? I feel like every attack that will come towards you whilst you're doing the animation, as long as you initially timed as a parry, you take no damage and then you gain health. Another mention about it is when you're bifrosted from other enemies, it will give you the health back that you just got bifrosted from, and then you will still gain health on top of it. It is an OP skill and an OP, like, you should 100% be using Valor if you're an aggressive type player, in my personal opinion. Once you get good enough, maybe you want to use the Wrath thing, but personally, I have no idea how the thing works. The thing was booty buns, bro. My last mention, still topping on Valor, is it can be used in any sense. The only time you can't use it is when enemies do unblockable grab attacks, right? And I can remember there's four at least on top of my head. There's one with Gyna, there's one with Heimdall, there's one with Thor, and there's one with the Huntress type enemies, right? They all have one attack where it's in a grabbable, where you can't actually use the rage to block out of it. I've tried, trust me, it's not gonna work. But everything else, 99% of all the other attacks, you can use it perfectly timed for that. I'm not 100% sure if blue shield attacks can be used on, but I'm quite confident that if you time it as a parry, you're not gonna take any damage and you're gonna just tank it. So Valor, 100%, put it in your put it in your mentions, right? Oh, I haven't finished with the Valor, right? I also forgot to mention that in the Gyno boss fight, for whatever reason, when you use Valor around her, it will stun her. I don't know why specifically, and only her, but it can get off a free stun. So if you're in danger, that's another mention. My next point will be stomping on health and rage crystals when next to enemies. This can stun them and or completely cancel whatever attack they're about to do, which is useful if you're about to take too much damage or you need a second or a quick getaway from another attack. That's a mention. The third one we're going to talk about now is between the Blades of Chaos, right? If you use the L2 R1 ability on Nightmares, it is always an insta kill as long as you collect the blade in. And the best thing about it is, because it's a throwable attack, you throw the Nightmare. If you throw it at an enemy, they will take damage. And if it's an elemental or whatever element that Nightmare is, the enemies will also take that damage as well. So if it's fire, they'll take fire damage. If it's poison, there'll be poison damage with it. It is 100% useful. This is also a thing that was usable in 2018, so it's a reusable skill, just like the stomping on health stones, reusable in both games. Still talking on the Blades of Chaos, another attack which is perfect to be used is the hold L2 and hold R1 ability. You throw both blades into an enemy and you do a shoulder barge. To regular enemies, it will take 2 of these if you're set up correctly, and you will fully put their stun up. For larger enemies, it will take a couple more. Mention on that, for larger enemies as well, especially wolvers, they can actually hit you through the animation, so be careful of that. That's just a mention. So now I'm going to mention about being fully stunned, right? Enemies that you've got fully stunned, if you use said ability I told you about, their health will still be considerably high up. So now the first mention is you can get attacks in whilst enemies are stunned, and it will not lower their stun rate any quicker. The second thing, or second tip towards that, is when you're also doing that, if their health is above halfway and you bring it below halfway, it may then take your R3 attack from being just a heavy attack to an actual kill, so that is beneficial. Another mention is when you go to press R3, you will then get iframes, so that's another mention. If you're about to be in danger, if you see it around you, just press it. You might be able to get yourself unlocked by yourself some time, recuperate. On topic of stunned enemies, the beast that Heimdall rides, once their stun is fully all the way up, it will always be an insta-kill. It will do, Kratos will do like a long 10-second animation, but it will always kill that specific beast enemy. Everyone else though, their health needs to be below a certain point. Still on the topic of stun, when you fight bosses, I recommend that you try and break the stun or break their guard, their posture, at least once during the fight. You get a very good damage increase or damage output on them. And it's only realistically being able to be done once during the fight anyway, because the stun takes longer to build up each time you break it. So it's definitely something I always try and get off in my boss fights. Usually the first thing I try and get off, because it makes the rest of the fight easier. And it's just worth doing. The next tip, they kind of can be both a pro and a con, but let me explain it. So specific relic attacks and some handles can actually stun heavy and boss enemies, right? But other ones can also make you take damage, and you're gonna catch a clean 20 piece with no sauce. You know what I'm saying? So be careful, figure out which relics you can and can't use, which handles you can and can't use, which can and cannot create stun. That was a lot of cans and cannots, but don't worry about it. Okay, another tip I'm gonna give you is when it comes to the yellow parry attacks, let it be known that the circle itself lets you know the attack can be parried, but it doesn't indicate the timing for it. So when you see an enemy do that, you need to learn their actual animation and their timing for it, so you can parry it correctly. Otherwise, you're gonna take damage. A clear indicator is gonna go back to that attack I was talking about earlier with the berserkers, when they run up in front of your face and they throw a cloud of poison. The circle will be gone before the attack comes out, so you need to actually learn the timing of the attack itself to be able to get it off. It just lets you know it can be parried, not when to parry. So it's a bit of a negative while I'm turning into a positive. The hand-to-hand combat in this game is booty butt, for the simple fact that they added in a third weapon. So I presume they believe they didn't need to actually increase the hand combat like how they did in 2018. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is with Kratos, when you tap R1 3 times, he does a combo with his hands, right? He throws punches. But if you throw 2 punches, or press R1 twice, he will do 1 punch, he will do a hit, and he'll spin it around. Now if you press block, you can also press to dodge, but it's 100% better if you press block. It will completely cancel the animation and you can repress R1 twice again, and you can kind of keep a nice loop with that attack. It's useful because it helps build stun up quicker, and you're gonna build way more stun than enemies doing R1, R1, L1, R1, R1, L1 than doing R1, R1, R1 3 times and getting the combo finisher at the end, or even hitting them with the kick. It's not worth it. My last tip to mention is, timed correctly, you can stun bosses in place. I did this at the beginning of the fight with Gaina, and I feel like every tip I've mentioned, if it's usable within this, I've probably done it in Gaina's boss fight, so there may be a clip of that right now for each time I've seen it. But you can stun bosses in place if you manage to time using your specials correctly, which can be useful in these boss fights where they have, on this difficulty, a lot of health. So just to mention. But also on the flip side, if you do miss time on the specials, the boss is very likely to move away, run away, jump away, and you may get punished and or take damage, or you see an animation start. So be very careful with it. It's quite finicky. Okay, so that marks off all the tips. So now I'm gonna move on to what we call as dimensions. And dimensions are things that I didn't believe were either too positive or too negative. They didn't fit in either the categories, but there's still pieces of information I believe you need to know and you should know when you're playing this game. So there may be repeats of things I've already said previously, but I may go into more detail and express some points properly. So we're gonna go with the first one. My first one is about the blue shield strike attacks that they add in. I, for one, am personally not a fan, because they are basically unblockable attacks unless you break the shield like it's suggestion to you. And I personally believe this ruins the fighting flow of the game, especially as there's nothing else that cannot either be parried, blocked, or dodged within the game. So it completely throws off what you've previously known and how you continue going out through the game. The thing that also makes me both like it and dislike it is when you do then go to press the shield strike, the time will be slowed down to ensure that you actually get the shield strike off. And once again, I believe it slows down the fight, so I feel like it would be much better off if I'm able to either completely dodge it or not have to worry about it at all. It shouldn't be made that important and become such a tedious process, because even unblockable attacks can be dodged, so it doesn't make sense to me. Another thing I'd mention about them as well is specifically when bosses do it, if you see them stand still or they move up into the air, it's quite likely that the attack is going to wipe the entire screen. So unless you're on them to be able to hit the shield strike and stop them from doing it, it's quite likely you're gonna die, especially on giving God of War difficulty. So this is what I was hinting at earlier when I was talking about finding the berserkers and why you have to stay so close to them, because a lot of them do have this attack, and in the event that you're not close enough, you will be caught and you will die. And like I said, unless you are close enough to do it, the animation will go too quick before you're able to react. The next mention I have to say is if you're struggling with optional bosses or rifts, you should leave them and come back to them at a later date. It is not worth your sanity to keep trying to force yourself to complete it, especially on this difficulty and the way this game functions. I've tried it and I failed miserably. It only ruins and dampens your own gaming experience. In the parts where you can't actually beat the boss or progress in that rift, you're probably quite likely underleveled, so come back at a later date and you may want to get it. And there's a lot of berserker fights I remember coming back to at a later date, and it was 100% doable. My next mention is the Gaina boss fight. The Niflheim and King Berserker and some undiscovereds cannot be completed until the main story is completed. So if you're trying to go for 100% completion, just know there's certain things that aren't accessible to you until you finish the story. And once you do, you're able to find ways to get towards it. And if not, you might also just have to look up a video to get it, because some things aren't necessarily that clear, or you might not know. My next mention is it feels like half the relics or special abilities you learn are from the last game, and in my opinion, I was not too much a fan of this because I was looking for a whole new not fighting, but a gaming experience. I enjoy having new abilities and not reusing what I've previously used, because it keeps the game entertaining for me, keeps it flowing, and it means there's a new way to have to adjust, a new way to play, and there's something else to do instead of reusing what I've already once used. And to continue with the things being the same, I feel like the moves for both the axe and the blades were also the same, so it didn't give me a variation when it came to fighting that I was necessarily looking for. Plus the lack of hand-to-hand combat, and then the spear. So that is my next mention. I have a script and I literally have the spear's ass going off on a tangent, and off on a tangent I shall go. The spear's ass! It's booty butt, doo-doo water, bottom of the barrel, sewage. On this difficulty, it is the most useless thing. It is way easier to give them hands than it is to use the spear. It is pointless, it is terrible. I hated it, I disliked it, and if you watch my walkthrough or even in the streams, you will see that I don't even use it for the vast majority of the time. That's how little respect I have on the spear. It was innovative, and I enjoy it for the storyline and the plot it created, but actual usability is pointless. It is nowhere near better than the axe, which is usually the best. It's not better than the blaze, and it's not better than hands, so it lacks any ability in my opinion. The only thing it is good for is the relic abilities, but other than that, the spear, in my personal opinion, it's not worth using. Everything else is a better option. It only becomes somewhat usable in the end game. When I remember we were going through Ragnarok, I said, oh, it's actually doing decent enough damage, but up until that point it wasn't worth it. And you could say it's based on you needed to upgrade it, but even once I had it upgraded before then, I wasn't enjoying it. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I didn't enjoy using the spear. My next honorable mention will be about armor sets and handles. Now I feel like during your first playthrough, the vast majority of them are going to be redundant unless you're trying to be experimentative. But in my opinion, once you find what you believe you like or what works best for you, it's quite likely you're not going to change up and switch up until you're playing your next walkthrough on New Game Plus. I have a video on my channel that's unlisted talking about my build, and it virtually did not change from that video to the end of the game. Now, you may not see that as a problem. I'm just saying for usability, versatility, which is something I gathered I now enjoy, it wasn't much for me. But I will follow that up with, at the end of the game, I do believe you should go to Muspelheim because you have the Muspelheim challenges. And once you are there, you should test out different builds and abilities and see what then would and wouldn't work for you in future playthroughs. And I feel like that's the best way to get reusability out of this game, because I can personally say that I remember trying out the max build options. So I tried out max strength, which I thought was good, max defense, which was okay, runic, which was alright, vitality, which was pointless, cooldown was meh, and luck is good. But realistically, especially with runic, cooldown and luck, I feel like they're heavily dependent on what you build them around. If you get the right relics, the right armor sets, and create the better blend of buffs, they'll be a lot better and create a lot more damage for you. So I guess I haven't found the specific ones which work for me, but I don't feel like they necessarily are the way I play neither. So that's also what I'll go with. Still on topic of reusing things, I didn't notice this until I completed the game and started watching other people's opinions on the game, but there's a lot of reused enemies, especially mini boss types, which I remember they did also do in 2018. Like I said, for the Hateful there's at least 6, for the Berserkers there's 11 or 12. I personally didn't mind, nor did I notice this until the game was completed, except for the Berserkers. I still believe 11 was excessive. Oh, and the Muspelheim challenges have 15, which I thought was incredibly excessive. But other than those 2 points, I didn't really have any other qualms or issues with the enemy types throughout my walkthrough. My last mention is, when you play this game, you should check out buttons and accessibilities, because there may be some shortcuts you can implement which can make the gaming experience a lot better and or easier for you. So my example for this was in 2018, they had a specific move where when you press down on the D-pad, Kratos would spin and do a 180 instantly. It was a quick turn, right? I was looking for it in Ragnarok and then I found it in accessibilities and I put it to the interactive part of my pad so that I could use it then. Other things I remember seeing was the shield strikes and Spartan rage. I think there was a couple others, but those are the ones I really remember. So if you do struggle to press multiple buttons at once, or you even struggle with just hand-eye coordination or clarity on the one buttons to press, this may be what you need to make it easier for you as you continue on the game. Anyway, that marks up everything I have to say about the mention. So it is now time for my conclusion, my final thoughts on the game. My personal opinion is I do recommend you play this game. God of War Ragnarok is a solid game. It is a good game, and Santa Monica Studios do not miss when they create God of War games. You could not say there's one bad game. You may say there might be repetition, but there's not one bad game, I feel like, amongst the whole entire franchise, and this is no exception. It follows suit being a good game. I would say it might be a bit better if you play 2018 or watch videos in 2018 to make the backstory have more relevance and importance, because there's certain parts in the storyline I believe without that information you're not either going to understand or it's not going to have the full impact it should have on you. And then if you watch the videos before he moved over to this realm, it may also help you, especially when he's giving out backstories about his past in Ragnarok, which is just to mention, you can enjoy the game without it. But if you're a lore buff and you enjoy that type of things, either play it or get videos off on YouTube because the storyline's based on it, and just use it before you play the game. The biggest thing I will mention though is don't you dare, for one singular minute, in your right mind, no, you have to be in the wrong mind to do this. Don't play this game on the hardest difficulty. Also in 2018. First thing is, you are not given an achievement for completing the game on this difficulty. So unless you're a masochist, which I presume I must be, because this is what I played the game on my first walkthrough. I did that in 2018 also, but I enjoyed the challenge, right? It is not worth your time, and it's not worth your sanity. I believe, even after completing it in that difficulty, it's not worth it. You should play it on regular and enjoy the game, enjoy the storyline, and in the event that you wish to have a more of a challenge, you then go up on your second, third, fourth, however so playthrough. My next thing I will say is I'm gonna make a small comparison between 2018 and Ragnarok on hardest difficulty. So for me, I believe combat in 2018 on hardest difficulty was a lot better to play, a lot more enjoyable of experience, because it felt like you were challenged on the learning curve of getting better at the game and to the enemy types, move sets, and progressing through getting better as an actual player, rather than in Ragnarok where it feels like you're completely overwhelmed with the amount of enemies you have to fight at one given time. Vast majority of the times I did not feel challenged on my ability of being a good player, but my ability of multitasking 10 enemies at one given time. Like there's one boss fight where you fight 2 soul eaters and like 10 other enemies. Like I don't understand what they thought when they created that boss fight. They failed for me, I guess, in the combat experience in Ragnarok. They fell short. I will say though, given how good the storyline is in 2018, I believe the storyline in Ragnarok was amazing. Like I said, it's my best and most favorite part of the game and kept me going. And I feel like I said, the backstory of 2018 built it up so well that when things were finally falling into place and characters were changing, it gave me a sense of happiness, or we'll say relief. It gave me the enjoyment I was looking for to see the characters develop and change. This is more specifically talking about Kratos, as he was changing near the end of the game and mid-game, which I personally did enjoy and believe. That marks up everything I currently believe I have to say about God of War Ragnarok 2022. You should get the game, you should enjoy it, you should play it, you should watch my walkthrough on it, you should watch the streams if you want to see more lore, the backstories. Be careful, there's going to be a lot of rage in those streams, or a lot of silence, but it's just a mention if you want to see other things, right? Anything else I feel like mentioning will be in the comments, and there will also be information in the description about how I feel about creating this video and the process of it, right? I hope you did enjoy my review of God of War Ragnarok 2018. I appreciate all y'all that have watched this, and do not go to the like and subscribe button.